That could happen. It's happened before. Kids come in and
Looks like we're live now, guys. So I want to just welcome all of our guests we have on here tonight, and just welcome everybody who's coming and watching this virtual event, our first virtual event with the Greenville Young Republicans. Now, before I introduce our fabulous interviewee tonight, I want to go ahead and give y'all a little bit of information about what we do with Greenville Young Republicans and what it's all about. So really what we're trying to do is just mobilize the youth and get them more involved in politics, especially Republican politics, and really encourage our younger voters to show up to the polls and get out and do what you believe in. So without further ado, I would love to introduce our South Carolina Lieutenant Governor, Pamela Evette. Welcome, Pamela.
well, thank you. And thank you guys so much for having me.
Thank you so much for coming. So the first thing we kind of want to do on here is maybe could you tell us a little bit about yourself, and then also could you tell us a little bit more about what you do as the lieutenant governor? I know sometimes we don't always know what each different official does, so I think it would be kind of cool if you tell us more about that.
Well, thank you so much. That's a great question. So I am the first female Republican lieutenant governor here in South Carolina. Very proud of that. That's right. And not only that, I mean, I am the first lieutenant governor to ever be elected with their governor. So Henry McMaster asked me to be his running mate. I've come out of the business world, so a year and a half, I've been on the job, and I really do love my job. So prior lieutenant governors, they presided over the Senate, and that's what they did most of their days while they were in session. But I have the good fortune of really working hand in hand with our governor. I travel the state. I meet with businesses. I find out what we're doing good. You know, that's my business background coming out, and the governor really wanted me to capitalize on that. Find out what we're doing good and where we can help businesses grow. How can government be more business friendly? Because South Carolina is open for business, and we want to make sure that South Carolina becomes the most business friendly state in the nation. I travel to schools and talk to teachers, meet with students. It's one of my favorite things as a mom. You know, it's kind of fun to see the little ones and read them stories and talk about what I do. And I work with groups like yours, sit down and meet and say, how do we get you involved? That's really important. So I commend you all for what you do in the Greenville Young Republicans. I try to do everything I can to encourage people from across the state to really embrace our young people, because you're the future of our party. So that's a little bit about what I do every day. And I can't tell you just how much I love being Lieutenant Governor of South Carolina.
Well, thank you, Lieutenant Governor, for joining us tonight. My name is Michael Carter, and I'm the chair of the Legislative Impact Committee for the Greenville Young Republicans. And what that means for tonight is that I was given the tough questions to ask. And with that being said, let's get to the first one.
Okay.
So here's your first question. In the middle of the night, you hear a sound coming from your kitchen. Upon investigation, you discover that a penguin is living in your freezer. What do you do?
What do I do? I probably call my son Jackson, which most of you guys know, because he would think that is the coolest thing, and probably show it on Instagram for the world to see, because he would want to become famous. So that's probably the first thing I would do, is I would call Jackson to the scene.
Take a penguin.
That's a great answer. Thank you for humoring us with that. We like to kind of break the ice with a good question to start out that's kind of off topic, and thank you for taking that. But on to a more serious topic. From the beginning, you have been on the front lines in the decision-making process in the governor's office to battle this pandemic, and even more recently as a key member of the Accelerate South Carolina team. We have seen the governor methodically shut down the state and now reopen with protective measures in place. What can you tell us about the ongoing response to COVID-19?
Well, that is a wonderful question, and I'm so very proud of our governor. He has handled this in such a tempered way, always being very careful to not ever trample on the constitutional rights of South Carolinians, making sure he's worrying about health and the best practices to keep us safe. So Accelerate SC was a way of bringing in local government, to bring in businesses, large and small, to bring in our healthcare community and talk about what is the best way to keep South Carolinians safe, but also how do we regain the trust and the confidence of customers, right? We want to make sure employees feel comfortable coming back to work, customers feel comfortable coming back in to patronize businesses and to come to restaurants. And so that's what Accelerate SC did. And we went down into subgroups. The state of South Carolina received $1.9 billion from the federal government. And the governor is adamant on making sure that there's full transparency with those numbers. There's very strict guidelines that comes with that money. It could mean that they come and take it from the state if it's not spent wisely. So one other big reason we want to make sure that we follow the guidelines, there's transparency, that the people of South Carolina know that we took that money and did exactly what it was meant to do, is help businesses, help people, and help communities. And so Accelerate SC has taken that. We have made sure that all of our meetings have been broadcast on SCE TV so people can see firsthand what's going on and who's all involved and the questions that are being asked. The governor asked 3 members of the House and 3 members of the Senate, and he allowed the Speaker and the President to pick those members so that they could be part of the discussion. We know being the state we are, it'll take the legislature to make new laws. And so we had them there for their input, and we wanted them to hear firsthand what was coming, what were the recommendations coming out from this committee. Businesses, we brought them to the table. I mean, the governor and I feel we are a business-friendly state, and to do that, you have to give businesses input. And so we had businesses, large and small, come up with the guidelines they felt would keep their people and their employee and their customers safe. And so they played a big part in the guidelines that were created for certain industries. Very proud that Senator Graham and Senator Scott came to an Accelerate SC meeting, and they gave us some really great insight on what's happening in the federal government. Senator Graham and Senator Scott both gave assurances that they would be fighting hard in the Senate to come up with some liability safe harbor rules for our businesses. And Senator Graham told us that he felt confident that we would have a treatment protocol by midsummer, and that it will be a game changer. He said it would take this virus from a 10 to a 2 and then really make it comparable to the flu. And that is something we can all be very hopeful for. So tune in next Thursday. The complete recommendation will be put together and bound for the governor. But so many of the things that we've come up with have already been rolled out. And you see that because hair salons are open. We have entertainment venues opening. Our pools are open. Nail salons are open. For one, I had a haircut today, so I'm very excited about that. I know all my friends are excited about getting into to get that done. So I just encourage everybody. Greenville, so proud to be a Greenvillian. Mayor Knox White was part of Accelerate SC in the governance subcommittee, and he shared with the entire state kind of the pledge, the business pledge, to give customers assurances that those businesses that carry that pledge symbol are doing all the right things and following the guidelines. And so I think you'll be seeing that all over the state. So very, very proud of what happened at Accelerate SC.
You kind of touched on the next question that I'm going to ask, but your business experience has been invaluable for the Accelerate South Carolina team. And for those out there who don't know, our Lieutenant Governor is a very accomplished businesswoman who started her own company and grew it to a $1 billion enterprise. In your opinion, what do you foresee happening in the future to the state in respect to the economy? Is there one thing you can point out that needs to be done? How do we get South Carolina back to work is the other part of that question.
Okay, so I think I'm very hopeful for South Carolina. I think what we showed the world is what we know. We are a pro-business state. Very tempered at what we did to disrupt any kind of business here, and how we are all committed to getting it back up and running and being a support system for our businesses. Governor jumped in right away and made sure that he took obstacles out of the way for businesses to make tough decisions about furloughing employees and making sure that his cabinet and our Department of Workforce was ready to take that influx of calls, just as strong as we are about opening up and making sure we have the resources to open back up. We learned from Senator Graham. I mean, we would love to be the PPE hub of the world, right? I think we're going to see that a lot of industry will be coming back to our country from China. I think we've seen what our president has been saying for a long time. And our president is a wonderful businessman. And he's been saying we cannot be dependent on other countries. And I think for so long, people kind of turned a blind eye on that. Well, this showed the world, you know, definitely our country, why he was so right. So I believe there's lots of opportunities. And I think a lot of those opportunities we can focus on here in South Carolina. Milliken has turned over and started a whole new production line with PPE. We've had companies expand and make different kinds of face shields, right? In Columbia, there's a new face shield that comes, it kind of attaches around the bottom of your neck and comes up. And, you know, those are all great things that have been born out of this. And so I'm just being an entrepreneur by spirit. I'm looking at all the ways that new business is going to be born out of this. And I think there's a lot of opportunity and so much good opportunity here in South Carolina.
Okay, great. You mentioned this earlier as well. Governor McMaster signed the continuing resolution, which effectively put the control of the CARES Act funding in the hands of the General Assembly. However, how would you spend it if you had total control of these federal dollars? How would you like to see them used?
So I would go letter by letter from the Accelerated SC's recommendations. And I think the good thing that came from that, as you saw when the governor signed the continuing resolution, he called on our legislators to come back to Columbia. And they had to come back soon because those dollars needed to get into the hands of the people that needed them the most, the people that were hurting. And I think his message was loud and clear. I think they have heard and are going to be coming back into the session the second week of June. And we have been told that they will follow the recommendations of Accelerate SC. It's a very narrow scope on that money. So there can't be a whole lot of wiggle room with it. It has to go strictly for COVID-19 and for reimbursements that were made. It can't replace revenue dollars. It can't go to special interests. It has to go to our localities. It has to go to businesses. A lot of it will be focused on broadband. Education and early education is something I have really focused on along with business. And if one thing has come to life, it's our need for broadband across our state. And that money can be used to help expand broadband. And I know we're going to talk about a little bit later, the census and how that all comes together. But I think we've realized, and a lot of discussion came out through Accelerate SC, how learning at home, Molly Spearman shared that 6% of public school children across the state, their teachers have not heard from since schools went virtual. And that could be because of their broadband connection, but that's a huge number. We know the summer slide is going to be obviously very enhanced because of this. And we also talked a lot about health, right? Mental health and telehealth. We know broadband will help fix a lot of those problems. So we are really focused in on it. And I share the recommendations of Accelerate SC to say a good chunk of this money has to come and figure out how do we prepare ourselves? Because Accelerate SC wasn't just how do we fix the problems of today. The governor's dream is how are we a stronger South Carolina tomorrow? What made us not nimble? What made us hard to respond to challenges across the state, and how will that never happen again? And so we know broadband and enhanced broadband would would help alleviate a lot of those challenges we felt with this pandemic.
Well, speaking of education, with my spouse being a school teacher and having 3 children, 2 of which are in the public education system, I would be remiss if I did not ask you about education. How do you see education working out going forward? What are some of the ideas coming from South Carolina Education Superintendent Molly Spearman and her team? And is there anything that you would like to see happen in terms of education?
Yeah, so I have always had the utmost respect for teachers, but probably never more than when I've been trying to help educate Jackson with his tele-school lessons here from home. Definitely very challenging, but we would love to see schools reopen in the fall. Getting kids back in the classroom is essential. I think it's good for their mental health. It is good for learning. We want to do that the safest way possible. I think that's been a big discussion. Molly Spearman has come up with Accelerate Ed to kind of do the same thing we did. It was like the governor's dream with Accelerate SC. And I think they're looking at all kinds of ways and creative ways to evaluate students coming back to see what this impact has been and how do we overcome this impact. So I am being very hopeful. I think we should all say a prayer that we really get kids back in school, but we should be very proud too, because unlike some states, we have continued to deliver meals. It wasn't just a question of when and how do we shut down schools, but it's how do we feed the children that are impacted once schools are shut down. So a lot of children, even in South Carolina, that count on schools for their only meals of the day. And so proud of our school bus drivers who delivered meals to districts and made sure children were fed. And, we did that in a way that any child who needed a meal, even if they weren't part of a school lunch program, when the bus came to their area, if they needed a meal during these hard times, just please come and get it. And they weren't asking anybody anything, and we delivered a lot of meals. So I think we all feel very good. And I know Senator Scott, he was just so impressed that, South Carolina just did so much to make sure our children were safe and protected.
Mm. Well, so after I feel like that's such a serious topic and has been so important in our state for children and education. My sister's a teacher and a lot of these things resonate with me. But then as another important question really has been about being able to access goods. So I have a really important question for you.
Sure.
Do you have a year's supply of toilet paper at your house?
No.
And if so, are you sharing?
So it's so funny because we shop at Costco, right? So what is it you do when you're a mom and you go to Costco? You buy a pack of toilet paper and a pack of paper towels because it's what your kids use. So I was glad that was our normal routine. And when this all happened and toilet paper became scarce, we still had a pack in the basement, but we have dwindled down. I didn't buy any during this, 6 weeks that you couldn't really get it. But we are now in the same place as everybody else. We need to see that toilet paper get back on the shelves. So that's a great question. And I'm still wondering what people are going to do with all that toilet paper. I think everybody,
I know.
Right?
There'll be some creative craft projects that will come out of that this summer. But on a more serious note, you mentioned the census, and this is something that I think a lot of young adults don't maybe know a whole lot about. There might be a lot of older Americans that don't know a whole lot about how does the census work? What is the census? How does it impact me? And why does it matter as a young voter in our state?
So the census is so important. Unfortunately, it has fallen during this COVID-19 pandemic. So it's kind of losing its meaning. And I think you're right. I think a lot of people don't realize because it's been around forever, right? I mean, let's face it, Jesus was born during the census. So look how far back a census goes. It's so very important. Like I said earlier, the state was awarded $1.9 billion to help the businesses and localities in South Carolina. That $1 billion doesn't just get calculated out of thin air. It is a formula that is based on our census numbers, right? So And that's anytime we have an emergency, whether it be a hurricane at the coast, a pandemic like this, a tornado like we saw hitting Anderson County. Census data is used to allocate money to areas. So we know the 2010 census, South Carolina was undercounted upwards of 20%. That's a lot of people. So 1.9 billion was calculated by the 2010 census numbers that were undercounted by upwards of 20%. We use census data to get funding for schools, funding for programs for our elders, right? We use it for roads and bridges. We use it for basic educational need and kids that have challenges. We use it for so many things that affect your life every single day. Public transportation. Millennials are way more advanced when it comes to public transportation, while monies that cities and localities and counties get for public transportation and like those great Proterra buses, that all comes from census data. So it was going to kick off April 1st is the kickoff to census, and it was right in the middle of COVID. So we need your help, Young Republicans. I need your help. I chair the Complete Count Census. We have got to get the word out. This is the first time in history you can do it online. You go to www.my2020census.gov. It literally takes less than 5 minutes. I did it for my household. It's done by residents. And we need to get everybody counted. I'm an accountant by trade, so I try to put this in an example that really makes people hold their breath, right? If we get, for every South Carolinian that gets counted, the state gets roughly $3,000 on behalf of that person. Over, let's say 100 people don't fill out their census, just 100 people in the state. $3,000 for 100 people over 10 years means that the state loses $3 million in funding for quality programs that we need. And this isn't like we're trying to just get more money. This is money that the states send to the federal government and the federal government holds, and they take people's census numbers, and every dime gets distributed somewhere to a state. We really need to get our fair share so that we can keep these programs going. For everybody who's ever hated a road that they've driven on, which makes it near and dear to us up in the upstate, because I hear that a lot. We get funding from our federal government to help enhance that gas tax that we have. Let's use it. So if you guys can help me by reaching out to your grandparents, you can fill out the census on any mobile device or computer. Please help me spread the word. If you're living in an apartment, you need to fill out the census. If you bought a house, you need to fill out the census. Make sure that our elders are counted. Let's make sure that our children are counted. Those are the two most undercounted groups, and two groups that need funding usually the most.
Well, thank you for that. We have one more question for you, and I promise it's a little bit more of a fun question. So we all know the 2020 election is coming up. What do you think is the most important thing for us young Republicans to do for the 2020 election?
Wow, I think the most important thing you can do is talk to your friends. So talk to people that are normally in your sphere of influence, right? Don't be afraid to bring up conversation. That's what I tell. My oldest daughter's 23. And, you know, if you talk as a group, you all believe the same thing. You're not convincing everybody else of our good story. So Congressman Doug Collins from Georgia, I was at an event with him, and it made so much sense, right? We always talk to people who kind of share similar interests. We need to talk to the person sitting next to us at work, that's maybe sitting next to us at church, that we bump into on the street. Be proud of who we are as Republicans. Wear your, Trump Pence 2020 shirt. That's what I do. It always gets people talking and asking me, why do you support our president? And it's like, well, do you have an hour? I can tell you a million reasons why I support our president. But I think it's so important. We have such a great resume, have such a good story to tell. Before this pandemic, we are on a trajectory like we've never seen before. Lowest unemployment, the most amount of business emerging, stock markets that were going out the roof. That equates to people's pensions, their 401ks. I mean, we are in such a great spot. We can be there again. And we have a business president. I can't even imagine something like this coming down and having a Hillary Clinton or a Joe Biden at the helm. Poor Joe doesn't quite know where he is some days. I mean, can you imagine him trying to put together our country? And so I think just the wisdom and the know-how and the business sense of our president is going to be amazing. And I think we need to share it. We need to get more kids your age coming over to the light, right? Get them out of the dark side and bring them over to the light. And I think you're in a great position because I think so many kids that have kind of drank the Kool-Aid on socialism and why that was going to be a great thing, I couldn't be in their homes for 2 weeks, right? They were losing their mind. And that's exactly what socialism was, right? Having somebody tell you what to do all day long, not to keep people safe, not in the midst of a pandemic, but that would be your way of life. And I think that very fairy tale notion of the government making it all good for you has now been debacled. And I think this is the time for it to really, I mean, you really have great talking points to talk to, you know, young people that have kind of been led down a bad path. So I think the most important thing for you to do is let your voices be heard. Get out there, support our president. You guys are well respected in your age group, in our community, and people will listen to you and they'll want to know why. And I think especially young people are really thirsty for dialogue, right? And don't be afraid to have back and forth conversation and some bantering, because like I said, you hold a great resume that they can't even touch. And so you can win them with facts. So get out there and let's get everybody signed up. Let's get them voting. Let's get everybody's on the ticket back to DC supporting our president. And in District 1, if you guys can help knowing young people in District 1, we really need to turn that seat red again. And we have some great candidates up there that we need to, you know, we'll probably have to help go up there and support and make sure that we can get Joe Cunningham out of office and we can get that seat red again so we can get President Trump some more power in the House to start voting for him.
And I think we can all justify a trip to the beach to go door knock.
I think that's, yeah,
So,
it's never a bad day in
that was
Charles.
our last- Yeah. So that was our last question. You know, we're going to wrap things up here. And we want to kind of talk about just like how can young Republicans get involved? We already talked about, you know, they can get involved with the election. They can tell more of their friends about what we believe, what we stand for. But another thing that young Republicans can do is honestly get involved with the Greenville Young Republicans. So just want to share a little bit more about that with people. You can follow us on all of our Facebook, Instagram. We have a website. If you visit our website, you can sign up to be a member and you can participate in all of our events. And it's super fun. You know, once we are out of quarantine, we can start having events too, which are just super fun. You get to hang out with people who are like-minded and we all agree about the same things. And it's so much fun just getting together and communing like that. And another cool thing is sometimes we have pretty awesome elected officials like the lieutenant governor come to our events. We threw a great pool club party last summer and we had, let's see, like William Timmons, quite a few state reps and city council members come. It was a fun time, got to know everybody in the community, especially the Republican community. So I would just encourage all of those young Republicans, you know, get out there, work in those elections, definitely tell your friends and family, but also just get involved together. It's so much more fun with friends. So, but we'll just kind of close things off here. And I want to thank you again so much for coming, or, showing up on this virtual meeting. I'm sure you're very busy, as we've seen with all of the COVID related stuff. And so we really appreciate hearing from you and getting to just show some of the young Republicans out there what is going on in our state. I think that's so important for them to know. Do we have anything else we want to say on here before we get off?
No, I would just like to say
Anything else?
No.
thank Pamela for doing that call.